And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. David Hines here with you, midweek edition on a Wednesday evening. Lots to talk about as we welcome you down to the show. And here's hoping that as you come to the end of the day, that you would have had a productive day and you are ready for our daily conversation. Of course, when we're finished here, Sherrod Duncan is on, and then we go on to Mark Benshaw. Tomorrow morning, of course, it's Buxtonian morning time. I'd like to welcome all of you. You're joining us from our homeland, Guyana, or you're joining us from further afield, there in South America, in Suriname, French Guyana. Some of you are in Brazil and Venezuela. Or if you're joining us from Europe, United Kingdom, France, Ireland, wherever you are, welcome down to the show, Politics 101. Good evening to Patricia, Brenda. Welcome to you. You're joining us from Queens, Yolandia. Miss Thomas, joining us from Queens, New York. I haven't seen this name around. Maybe a new viewer. Welcome to Politics 101. Paul Prasad is joining us from London. London. You know, when I was younger, I wasn't too keen on America. I wanted to go to London. I wanted to visit Lord's cricket ground and the Oval and Old Trafford and Headingley. You know, as a young cricket enthusiast, you wanted to see the joys of England. Welcome to you. Good night, everyone. Joyce Vasconcelos. Welcome to Sharma. My brother, Ori Newton. I notice you're keeping our village hot. I saw you at the school sports there a couple of days doing coverage. Welcome to Politics 101. Clyde, good evening. Welcome to you, Mr. MacPherson. Desiree Simmons, who is an old-timer. Desiree is a loyalist, coming to us from one of my hometowns, Maryland. Good evening to all of you from Maryland, my brothers and sisters and my mother and my cousins, all there in Washington, D.C., Maryland area. If any one of you is listening, welcome. I know you all are giving me a hard time that I've not been home in a long time. But I'll be coming soon. Welcome down to Politics 101. Albert Morgan, the man from number 51. Shalom, my brother. Rhonda, from one of my favorite villages, Denamsted, of course. I may have said a million times, I spent lots of time as a boy visiting Denamsted, my relatives there. I used to go there and spend the entire August holidays. And in those days, when you go beyond the train line, there used to be a lot of jamun tree. When you come back from the Amstel, you look like jamun. The Griffiths, my family there, they're still there on the Clay Brick Road, and Simone is keeping the fire going there. Lots of them have migrated to the United States, but they go back very often. I always tend to miss the family get together because they're always holding them when I'm ready to travel. But then Amstel remains one of my favorite villages, very steeped in the culture there. My cousins, I shout out to you, any of the Griffiths, the Ketna people there. Welcome to Politics 101, Judy. Welcome. Good evening to you, Judy Williams. Good evening to you. And I'm sure Rhonda knows my family them there. And Boderation Simone is my family there. And good evening to you. If you're joining us from the Caribbean, welcome. Welcome to you, Candy. Candy, joining us. If you join us from the Caribbean, wherever you are in the Caribbean, you're home. You're home. Emily Durant, good night. Good evening. Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica. Lots of us in Antigua, I understand 1 out of 4 Antiguans are really Guyanese. Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, we're all over. St. Vincent, Grenada. That's a place that I spent a lot of time in Grenada. I have lots of friends in Grenada. As I said, as a boy, you wanted to go to England. You also wanted to travel the Caribbean. And one has gotten the opportunity to travel throughout our Caribbean and to see us, our sameness. It's amazing when you go through the Caribbean, how at home you feel. Good evening to you, Marlon Samuels, another regular. Welcome to Politics 101, Carmen Bailey. Welcome to you. Welcome to you. And there are people who come on to this show to learn. We've been teachers. We continue to teach, and it's glad to have them on. Some of these people who have making themselves clowns a pastime. And sometimes you have to allow them. My auntie always say, if this is what this clown is say, look at them. My auntie always say, if people want to make themselves fools, you help them to make themselves bigger fools. And some of these chaps and ladies, whoever they are really so foolish. But you wish them luck. Good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101. This month of October is a significant month. For those of you who are into Calypso and soca music, this is Calypso History Month. We have lost one of the top Calypsonians there in Trinidad. I noticed a person with the same name here, Winston Henry, the explainer, who gave us Calypso such as Lorraine, Rasmas, Rasta Chick, Don't Hold Me Ras, Don't Feel Me Ras, all of you guys like to do is to feel up, feel up. I, as a woman, don't like to deal up, deal up. Don't touch me, Ras. Don't hold me, Ras. One of the feminist calypsos, calypso that heaps dignity on women. You know, you men, you come in the party, you know, all you all want to do is to feel up, feel up. And she said, I don't like, as a woman, I don't like to deal up, deal up. So don't touch me, Ras. You know, I played here on Rastafari and Rasta Sister, Rasta Chick. Winston Henry, the explainer, dead at 75. Not well known as Sparrow, but I'm sure some of you remember those calypso, you know, Rasta Chick and Rasmas is the real class. Lorraine, I'm going home to catch the jet plane. New York is too cold. I can't stay in New York. When in Trinidad, in my homeland, calypso playing and carnival going. Lorraine. That's perhaps his most famous song. Dead at 75. Explainer. And it's Calypso History Month. And those of you who are into Calypso, as you know, Calypso is the mother music of our English-speaking Caribbean. Music came out of the slave plantation. And it was the way of the enslaved people speaking back and speaking up to the master. Speaking up to the slave master and speaking back. And by the time we got to the 1970s, Ras Shorty Eye blended calypso with the tassa beat from the Indo-Trinidadians, Indo-Caribbeans, and he put a little bit of soul and jazz in it and create soca. The soul of calypso, that's what soca is. The soul of calypso, invented by Ras Shorty Eye, Mr. Garfield Blackman, now deceased. And some of the early exponents of that was Maestro, Mr. Trinidadian. You're only fooling yourself. You don't know what you want. Yesterday you cussed Castro and say he's a communist. Today the same Castro is a hero, Mr. Trinidadian. Say what you want. Indo-Trinidadians say they don't eat meat. But you don't find anybody murdering black pudding more than them. Maestro was a master, and he died. Tragically, actually, he sang a song about a man trying to help somebody and dying, and he himself died. Going home one night, came out of his car to help somebody who had a flat and was hit by a car. He died. He's rated as one of the greatest Calypsonians, the mighty Maestro. He was one of the first exponents of the Calypso, the soca music. And of course, soca's moved on to dancehall. Talking about that, opposition leader Aubrey Norton has accused the PPP of feeding the young people in Guyana a diet of lawless music. There was always lawless music, and there is always going to be lawless music. The music has become more lawless, or we have more lawless music, because in many regards, the music has become commercialized. I was saying this morning, I was in St. Kitts in the year 2000 and 2001 for the St. Kitts Music Festival. And Beenie Man was there to perform, And at a press conference, he said he didn't allow his 8-year-old daughter, I think, to listen to his music because he wasn't making music for her. He was making music because it makes money. So the commercialization of soca, because soca was not reaching an international audience. And in order to get to an international audience, they had to move towards the dancehall slackness. Same thing with reggae. Bob Marley died in 1981, and they began to market the music to Black Americans. And that's where you get the dancehall slackness from. So as the music has become more commercialized, we see the slackness. And, the slackness is part of the evolution of the music. And if there are people who want to bring artists to play the slack music and people want to go, that's their business. But when the government is taking taxpayers' money and bringing this music and encouraging people to go, in many cases, I understand giving away tickets to people to go to the slackness thing, that's another matter. The government, which is responsible for the welfare of the people, cannot be messing up the welfare of the people by taking taxpayers' money and spending it to bring slackness. You shouldn't be taking taxpayer money to bring people to engage in that kind of thing. The issue here is, even if you want to promote a certain kind of culture, all right. So Beres is all right. I actually looked at the Beres concert on YouTube, and I enjoyed it because Beres is not into slackness. Those of you who know Barry Salmon music and that genre of music, lovers rock, would know it's a music that touches the inner reaches of our consciousness. So one is not saying you should not go to these shows, but the government is spending money. Government is spending taxpayers' money to bring this music with violence and homophobic lyrics and lyrics against women. That's another matter. That's another matter. And this PPP government has been known for that kind of thing. Known for that kind of thing. Because they believe that all you have to do is to feed supporters of the opposition. You have to feed them plenty music and rum and wine up. You get them to take their minds off politics. You get them to take their minds off politics. That is a theory. And it's not only PPP do that. Some of our own Black people feel that way. If you want to get rich, bring the nasty music, and you will see how Black people will flock. It's something that we have to address. We have to address this issue of the use of the negative aspect of our culture as a means of controlling people, social control. But like I said, the government ought not to be in that business. Somebody wrote and said Dr. Hines is against the cricket carnival and cricket tourism. I am not. I'm not against carnival. I am not against anything of that nature. People have a right to engage in the lighter side of life. As I said, I looked at the Barry Salmon show, and I rather like it. Barry's singing Lovers Rock. Lovers Rock was created in the late 1970s in England. Black British women created Lovers Rock. Some of the early exponents like Carol Thompson and some of those black women, they're the pioneers of Lovers Rock. And then people like Freddie McGregor and the Cool Ruler and Dennis Brown, and these guys went over to England and made their name. Barris and them made their name. Because Lovers Rock wasn't a big thing in the 70s in Jamaica. Jamaica was roots reggae. The Bob Marley, Born in Spear, Peter Tosh, Jimmy Cliff kind of reggae. So Lovers Rock was created by Black British women. You learn that on Politics 101 in the late 1970s. And that's paving the way for the Dennis Browns and Freddie McGregor and Beres Hammond and those guys to really make a name for themselves in that sub-genre of the music. The Lovers Rock in many ways came out of similar circumstances as Rocksteady. Rocksteady would have been there in the late 60s, 18 glorious months. Rocksteady was that little gap in between ska and reggae. And to this day, people believe that some of the greatest music ever made in reggae period came from the Rocksteady period. And remember, we in Guyana, you're going to Patronal and so on, and Rocksteady playing, and you're dancing the strong man. Daniel, you remember them days, girl? My sister, Daniel Booker. Danny is really me sister friend. They're classmates. But Daniel is me friend, grow match, but everybody big now. Good evening, Daniel. And welcome. I hope you go in and vote in Pennsylvania. They hope you vote right, Daniel. I know you don't make joke with your vote. You know, during the campaign in 2020, no matter how Daniel abusing, she's there at every rally. And sometimes we don't pay enough homage to people like that. Every rally can get to the help. Daniel's ready. She gets your umbrella and she's ready to go. And all those sisters, mostly sisters, there are brothers too, but mostly sisters who walked behind the leaders during the election. Mrs. Cyril Walker, welcome. People love to be taught their own culture, which is definitely not rough and shoved down. Yes, you're right, brother Cyril. You're right. I know somebody by this name, Cyril Walker. And I don't know if it's the same person. The face look familiar. The face look familiar, but I know the name. Cyril, yes, you're right. You're right. You're right. We have given in Guyana. In Guyana, we had a beat. Tom Charles and the syncopators had come up with the boom. The boom. That was our attempt at creating our own beat in the 1960s and the 1970s. And in Jamaica, in Barbados, they'd come up with something called spooge, the merry men. So we in the Caribbean, we have given ourselves some beautiful gifts. And here is this government trying to use the culture as a means of subjugation. You may ask, How can you use culture as a means of subjugation? And if you are using the racy aspects of our culture in order to demobilize us politically, then you are doing a disservice to the culture. It's like the attempt the other day to hijack the cricket to validate the PPP's narrative. The PPP's narrative. And the PPP is engaged in masking. Masking. That's what they're engaged in. They're engaged in masking. They're using these things that our people gravitate towards. Cricket, music, dance. They're using those things to mask the descent into authoritarianism, into domination. The whole thing that if people are engaged in the lighter side of things, then they pay less attention to the heavier side of things. Alton Ellis, Ken Booth, these are all names of that period. Pluto Shervington. And Alton Ellis was a boss. Alton Ellis, of course, his sister Hortense Ellis. Alton Ellis was singing since in the ska period and was one of the first big names in England. He died a couple of years ago. Alton Ellis and Owen Gray. Lots of names that are not as well known as Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and so forth, but who played an important part in the development of music. The first real reggae superstar was Jimmy Cliff. Jimmy Cliff made the first Jamaican album, Wonderful World, Beautiful People. That's 1972, before Bob Marley's Catch a Fire in 1973. A lot of people think that Bob Marley was the first superstar. No, it was Jimmy Cliff. He starred in the movie The Harder They Come. And that's where that song, one of my favorite songs, The Harder They Come, The Harder They Fall. He starred in that movie. And he was attached to Island Records as their first big superstar. And he fell out with the fellow who owned Island Records, and he walked out. And as he was walking out the door, coming through the door was Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer. And the rest is history. Jimmy Cliff, of course, has gone on to make a big name for himself. You know, Wonderful World, Beautiful People, that first album, and immortal songs like Vietnam and you know, really those are the pioneers of the music. Of course, Bunny Wailer was to leave the Wailers first, and then Peter Tosh left, and that's when Bob Marley went solo. He reshaped the band, brought in the I-Threes, Judy Mowat, Marcia Griffiths, and Rita Marley, and the rest is history. Exodus, of course, was Bob Marley's best-selling album. That was the biggest, that album with Kaya and all of that on there. Welcome and good evening. We're talking a little culture and a little politics tonight. as we try to make sense of our country and what is going on there. I am of the view that our country, Guyana, cannot be sustained with what is going on there. There are people who are trying to tell us that they want to heal the wounds in Guyana. But how can you heal the wounds in Guyana when you are part of the problem? The PPP and the PNC are the two major parties in Guyana. The PNC tried. They tried from 64 to 92 to try to develop Guyana on their own. In fairness to the PNC, they took the country to a certain level. Lots of progressive policies that benefited the poor in the 1970s were enacted by the PNC. All those Indian holidays, they were enacted by the PNC. National service, enacted by the PNC. I would say, even as a critic of the PNC over the years, that the PNC has a better record of racial integration than the PPP. They tried. But it's not difficult to heal the wounds in a place like Guyana. It is not easy. Very difficult. And the PNC tried. But you can't force people to come together if they don't want to come together. And in the end, you have to reach for authoritarianism if half of the population is saying, we're not behind you. And ultimately, the PNC could not do it on its own. Could not do it on its own. Oh, Millie Small, my boy Lollipop. That is what puts international. I think Millie Small is still alive. My boy Lollipop. Hey, you all know the history, John. You know the history. It's called Ska period. Small, thin young lady, big hair. And when she did My Boy Lollipop turn the record charts upside down in England and really put Jamaican music, Caribbean music on the scene, My Boy Lollipop. And yes, she was signed with Island Records too. Yes. So this is what I like. This is why I love being Chinese and Caribbean. The wealth of knowledge on any subject, whether it's cricket or music or politics or football, our people are informed. I once asked a professor in an interview I did, why this is so, and he pointed to the fact that as Caribbean people, we are really global people because we were part of the British Empire. And the British Empire stretched from Africa to Asia to Europe, right through to the Caribbean. And so we were part of that large empire. So we had a sense of the world. And our Caribbean, CLR James argues, is really the meeting point of these cultures from Africa and Asia and Europe, rubbing up together and mixing up together. Despite our differences, we have achieved in the Caribbean what many regions of the world have not achieved. And that is, we have not just lived side by side. What is usually known as multicultural. Multicultural means that you live side by side. Professor Nettleford would like to think that in the Caribbean have what is called interculture, interculturalism. I always tell my students, if a white Jamaican, a mixed Jamaican, and a black Jamaican, or Barbadian or Antiguan, as the case may be, stand outside the door, you can't tell which one is black and which one is white, because they speak the same with the same accent. Whereas in America, for example, which is multicultural, where people live side by side, you put a black American, a white American outside the door, and you can tell when they open their mouth who's black American and who's white American. But in the Caribbean, in Guyana, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell a Portuguese Guyanese from an African Guyanese or an Indian Guyanese by speech. Because Nettleford argues that despite our differences, there's a way in which we are interculturalized. It's a thesis that is worth examination. Of course, Trinidad and Guyana and Suriname are somewhat of an exception. But if you go through Barbados, Antigua, and so on, there's a lot of interculture going on there. So yes, our people are a global people. Getting back to this thing of trying to bring the country together, for all its faults, the PNC tried. They tried. Burnham tried. Hoyt tried. Hoyt was even called, Desmond Posad, because he genuinely thought that he could convince the East Indians to follow him. And we have learned after 60 years that that model, the model of breaking down or smothering ethnic identity and trying to create this new Guyanese identity, is not perhaps the best approach. That a better approach is to recognize our different identities and try to bring us together based on both our similarities and our differences. That is, a Guyaneseness that is based on our diversity. So we are not trying to kill off African identity or Indian identity or Chinese or Portuguese identity or Amerindian identity. Rather, what we are trying to do, as Nettleford would argue, is to have a kind of interculture in which a Guyanese culture is reflective of the various strands. I think Burnham got it wrong because he was trying to create this new Guyanese identity and downplaying the ethnic identities. He meant well. The PPP is trying to do something interesting. They, like Burnham, are trying to create one identity, but one identity that is grounded in dominance of one of those sub-identities. In fairness to Burnham and the others, I don't think Burnham and them were interested in African superiority. I listened to Nascimento speak about Burnham, and he said Burnham was not racist. And I've heard people, who have associated with Burnham, and they said he was not a racist. A racist is someone who believes in the superiority of their race. He was not. He genuinely wanted the races to live together, but he was leading one of the races. That's the problem. You're basically saying, I'm the leader of one race, and I can bring all the races together. And it didn't happen. And the PPP now is trying to bully our people. They come up with this catch thing, one Guyana. It's a catch thing. And they're hoping that one Guyana will replace one people, one nation, one destiny. Whenever people, politicians, political parties are trying to divide, they always put on the mask of unity. Hitler was talking about the fatherland. There's always this mask that we are all one, while people are divided. This whole thing about Dr. Ali has been different. I support Dr. Ali's policies. What policies? Dr. Ali has no policy. But if you create this man with this policy and this vision, you create this new God in your mind. You're conning people. You're conning people. What some of the supporters of the PPP are not taking into consideration is that ethnic groups, whenever they have power, one of the things they do is they use that power to settle past differences. The literature and ethnic studies tell you that. Two groups have problems, and they will wait until they get their hand on power. And then they'll use that power to exact revenge. And I see some of that happening right now. I do not believe that the Indian people, Indian working class people, are racist. I not for one moment believe that. But I believe that, like all ethnic groups, they've bought in to narratives. Black people have their own narratives. Indian people have their own narratives. Portuguese people have their own narratives. Amerindian people have their own narratives. And one of the modern PPP Indian narratives, is the narrative of being cheated at elections. If you are 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old, you would have grown up as an Indian Guyanese that elections were rigged, that kept your group and their leaders out of power. You're Indian Guyanese, you grew up with that diet. And yes, there were rigged elections under the PNC. But what the narrative of PNC rigged election is not just about rigging election, is that this rigging of election robbed Indian people of power. The narrative. Soon, if you're Indo-Guyanese, you come to believe that Indo-Guyanese do not rig. Our party, the PPP, does not rig. And that rigging is an ethnic thing, an ethno-political thing, is a PNC thing, and by extension, a black thing. That's the narrative. If you are Indo-Guyanese, that you are fed. What that means is that your party could rig the hell out of elections. You will not see it. Because you've been socialized to believe that rigging has an ethnic face. How do I know that? I, David Hines, have been involved in politics 50 odd years. I've never been close to any rigging of elections, and I've never had cause to. But you talk to the average Indo-Guyanese supporter, and they will tell you David Hines is a rigger. Simply because rigging has an ethnic face in Guyana. So the 2020 elections have two narratives or two outcomes. One narrative is that the elections was being rigged at GCOM. Mr. The Region 4 returning officer, Mr. Mingo, was there with his spreadsheet, and he was rigging the hell out of the election. And the PPP just rung that bell. And the majority of Indo-Guyanese supporters, once you say rig election, a light bulb goes off because it's their narrative of suffering. What happened 3 months later, then it was also revealed that the PPP was involved in perhaps bigger rigging. If you're Indo-Guyanese, you don't hear that. You don't see that. Because how could they? Rigging has an ethnic face. The PPP don't rig. The PPP is the victim of rigging. So the narrative goes. So most of the Indo-Guyanese brothers and sisters will tell you about the 5-month rigging with a straight face. And they would never talk about what came out of the boxes after the recount. What came out of the boxes is not going to be part of the African Guyanese narrative. You see, African Guyanese have had a hard time beating back the rigging thing. You know, that is why African Guyanese hold on to Burnham. And Burnham was great, and they avoid the rigging thing because the PPP has hammered that rigging thing. It's hard. But now African Guyanese have come to realize that rigging is an equal opportunity thing. That if you paint your opponent as the rigger, it allows you to rig undetected. And your supporters believe that you would never rig. Because when you talk about rigging, you are talking about something that goes deep within the Indian Guyanese consciousness. It's not whether they're right or wrong, it's that that has become part of the narrative of suffering. When Burnham banned flour, wheat flour, and that was not the only thing he banned plenty things. But Indian Guyanese seize on to the bannings and turn it into an Indian narrative. Wheat then what? Took on an ethnic face. Black people use as much wheat as Indian, you know. They use the same wheat flour to make bread and make bake. The Indians use it to make roti and whatever else they make with it. But so wheat was non-racial. But Indian Guyanese turned wheat into an ethnic product. I'm explaining to you how our ethnicity works. The reality is that Black people use flour as much as Indians. Because it was a Black government that banned wheat, Indian Guyanese turned the banning of wheat into a political narrative. Wheat became an ethnic product. In fact, it is not. But when you go back to Burnham and the PNC, the narrative of African Guyanese about that period is different from the narrative of Indian Guyanese. African Guyanese remember national service. Indian Guyanese remember national service in a negative way. African Guyanese remember national service in a positive way. For Indian Guyanese, national service means sending their daughters to be raped by Africans. And for African Guyanese, national service meaning sending your daughters to get a chance in life. Same thing, two narratives. Same thing, two narratives. So Burnham and the PNC period are remembered differently by the two ethnic groups. So by the time you got to 2020, and you say rig, light bulbs went off in the collective Indian mind. And they don't see anything else. It is the same way in which economic inequality and inequity is part of the African Guyanese narrative. The Indians own all the money. The Indian own all the land. African Guyanese will tell you that straight. Don't bother tell them it's the Indian bourgeoisie who own the money and own the land, and Indian poor people don't have any. Because they're not thinking class, they're thinking ethnicity. So you have narratives and counter-narratives. And when you have, in an ethnic society, narratives and counter-narratives, it makes it difficult to bring those two ethnic groups together. It makes it impossible for one of the ethnic parties to bring the country together. You know, the PPP can go to every African village, and they are going to find at least 20 Africans who are going to say, yeah, you're all doing good. And they're going to fool themselves that they got black people where they want them. The same thing on the PNC side. You always hear the PNC say that, you got to get these crossover votes, and perhaps a good reason, because their support base for a long time was minority. And so they had to pander to the Indians. And perhaps in the process of doing so, the PNC was softer when it came to ethnic domination than the PPP, because the PPP had that built-in majority. It was not soft when it came to ethnic dominance. But now that the PPP does not have that built-in majority, what has it done? What did it do? It did just as the PNC did. When the PNC realized it didn't have a built-in majority, it moved towards manipulation of elections. When the PPP realized that it lost the majority, it moved towards manipulating elections. You all realize that in the 2020 election, the PPP has not made one accusation against the PNC or the coalition about people voting 20 times and 30 times. When I was a boy growing up, that's how PNC rigging used to be. You vote 20 times and 30 times. The PPP find the more scientific way to rig the voters list. Taking out the statutory documents from the boxes. Collecting all them people going away to America and Canada, collecting the ID card and putting it to use at election time. If you collect 10,000 ID cards of people who gone waste 2 seats, the PPP had to rely on rigging from about 2006. But because the PPP has conditioned its supporters and even some people who are not its supporters, that the other side is the rigger. The PPP is able to rig undetected or were able to do so. 2020 election changed up all of that. All of that. The PPP is laid bare. But its supporters will find it hard to believe that. I don't think they believe it. 40% of the people, the electorate in America, believe Donald Trump won the last election. 50% of our population believe that the PPP don't rig and that the PNC rigs. And that is significant. Means that the divisions are very great. So this government that is in power is setting out to what? Exact revenge. We are going to pass electoral laws to jail people. You're not talking about jailing your supporters because they don't rig. Who you're trying to jail, Mr. AG? The use of power to exact revenge. We are mounting a commission of inquiry into the rigging of election. So you already know the election rig. You are putting together a commission to prove what you already know. And you, who were a participant, you are passing judgment on your co-participant. The assumption is that you didn't rig. You can't rig. You don't know how to rig. So you are setting up a commission to prove that your other half rig. The assumption is that you did not rig because God didn't put you on earth to rig. Manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. You are charging people and hauling them before the court for misconduct in public office. The assumption is that the other side is rigging and you are not rigging. And our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters are caught in that web. Whether you call it reality or you call it perception, in politics, often perception and reality become the same. What do you do in such a circumstance? As I said, African Guyanese are developing their own counter narrative of rigging. Now, for the first time, African Guyanese can point to PPP rigging. If they were speculating before, if they were speculating with the 92 and 97 and 2001 and 2006 election, the 2020 election has now moved from speculation to aha. Both sides now have rigging narratives against each other. And that is what the 5 months was about. The PPP said they see the PNC rigging, and the PNC say, all right, we used to shut we mouth, shut we eye, and move on to the next election. We're not going to do it this time. We're going to skin you up this time. You want to play the skin up game? We're going to go down the road. And that's what happened. And so the PPP is now laid bare. But our Indian brothers and sisters don't see that. And we shouldn't blame them for not seeing it. Ethnic narratives after time get into your consciousness. Listen, how often you talk to the average Indian brother or sister, and they tell you about democracy. They tell you about democracy. Guyanese have never bought into any big notion of democracy. Guyanese, whether we're Indians, African Amerindians, it's about Abi, not democracy. All of a sudden, you cannot take democracy out of our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters' mouth. And it's democracy becomes this cover. I am not siding with the PPP, or I am not dissing the coalition because of politics. I'm siding with the PPP, not because I like them, but because they won the election democratically. So democracy becomes this cover for ethnic solidarity. And people like myself who are independents, neither PNC nor PPP. The PPP and our Indian brethren and sistren really wanted us to validate their narrative of the election. We said, no. There's more in the matter than the pistol. Wait, hold on. And of course, we hold on. And we see more than pistol in the matter. That is why the PPP supporters, some of our Indian brothers and sisters, are so angry at people like me. because we did not validate their narrative of the election. If you don't validate the narrative of the election, it means that you support the other side. That's how the logic of politics operate. The logic of politics operate. So all of we get lumped into one basket. David Hines is nasty so-and-so. He's a monkey, he's this, he's that. Forgetting that David Hines was part of a radical group that opposed the Black government. David Hines was part of a group, myself, Lincoln Lewis, and so on. We were critical of the coalition, although we voted for the coalition and supported it. And Indian Guyanese loved us. We were on the front page of the Static News and the Kaieteur News every day. When the coalition kicked me and Lincoln Lewis out of the Chronicle, Ben Ladd invited us. Invited us right away to go to the Kaieteur News. When Ben Ladd took a stand that the coalition was rigging, and Lincoln Lewis and I refused to take that stand, we had to go. We had to go. Our Indian brothers and sisters must know that history. Must know that history. Must know that history. So we're at this point where we are so far apart as a nation that we are on the brink, the precipice. And if a hard breeze blow, we will get blown overboard. That's where Guyana is. The PPP as an old party, a party that is steeped in the politics of domination, not just ethnic domination, but plain political domination. They have decided to fight it out. At the end of the day, do we want a country or do we not want a country? We're not going back to Africa. We're not going back to India. We're not going back to Madeira. For all intents and purposes, we're right here in Guyana. How are we going to work it out? As we go to the edge as we did, go over the edge as we did in the 1960s? Is that what we're saying? Guyana, we are holding the proverbial gun to our head. This time we are holding it loaded with oil. The PPP is drunk. They're drunk with oil. You know, just get drunk off of rum, liquor. The PPP is drunk off of oil. And when a drunk man gets a gun to your head, believe that he will pull that trigger. That's what we're dealing with. The Harbour Bridge get knocked up. David Hines and Rickford broadcast it to get knocked up. If rain fall and flood tomorrow, I'll be north and cause the flooding. The domestic violence is rife in Guyana. Lincoln Lewis is the cause of it. It is a government that is creating a situation of disintegration of our society and blaming other people for it. If you cough in people every day, coughing them, roughing them, beating them up economically, beating them up socially, beating them up politically. And they decided to fight back. And you're telling them, you are not fighting back because I beating you up. You all are fighting back because you all are naturally bullies. That's what this government is telling us. That's what they're telling us. Dr. King used to say, you can't want to light fires and want to use me as a fire extinguisher. And that's what the PPP is doing. They're annoying people. They're harassing people. And if you annoy and harass people, they're going to hit back. And then when they hit back, you decide to say, Rickford won't make the hit back. That's where we are. And when you reach that point, you have to begin the process of repairing. But you are only going to repair the situation in Guyana until the representatives of both sides sit down and decide they want to do it. At the moment, one side doesn't want to sit down. Norton said, I am ready. I am ready. This is the bad man that they talk about. Or when Norton turned leader, what you going to do and what you won't do. And he's been saying, I'm ready to sit down. I'm ready to talk about how do we settle the question of power. And what the other side is saying, I'm ready to jail you. I set it up on a commission to find out who rigged. That's where we are. That's where we are. Tomorrow night, the AFC has been making some proposals. Some of them are not new proposals. They're talking about raises of wages. The AFC said they're ready to sit down to renegotiate the contract. And somebody wrote in today's paper, the AFC must bring along the PNC. Not the AFC must bring along the PPP. The PPP don't want to renegotiate, but if our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters, they cannot see that the PPP is working against their own interests. So this brother, I think is Dr. Lal, writing the paper steady, AFC must bring along the PMC, but AFC must bring along the damn PPP. I look at the interview between Glenn Lal and Jack Dio. Clearly Jack Dio know about oil and gas more than Glenn Lal. That was clear in the interview. But what was also clear is that Glenn Lal got Jack Dio number. When Glenn Lal keep asking me, what would you have done better or different if you were in Raphael Trotman situation when it comes to sign? And he keep dodging, he running, Jack Dio run, he run. He know more about oil and gas than Glenn. But what Glenn get it on is Ben is telling him that you all are hypocritical. Can you cuss the coalition says a bad contract? And now you aren't changing it. Jack, you run like a curry. But you can't get away. Because they're not Depany. Our Indian Guyanese brothers and sisters have to see that. They have to see that the con that you are putting on the other side, the evil that you're putting exists right there on your side. The AFC must bring along the PNC. Who gonna bring along the PPP? Are you saying that the PPP don't need to be brought along? Of course, that's what you're saying. Of course, that is what you're saying. We're gonna stay on top of this. We're not gonna stop exposing them. And certainly, we're not gonna stop mobilizing ourselves for fundamental change, for transformation of our society. A society where no ethnic group is left behind. No ethnic group is left at the bottom. If we move into the top, we move into the top together. If we have in one Guyana, we must have one Guyana with the money. Paisa. Not be one Guyana with jump up backball music. We want one Guyana with the high money. One for you, one for me. Two for you, two for me. We don't want one Guyana with backball. We want one Guyana with the high resources. Then one for you, one for me. Two for you, two for me. Three for me, three for you. When you're ready to do that, then you come and talk to me about one Guyana. Until then, you're fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. One Guyana with the money. Tomorrow night, I'm going to have the AFC people to come on, and we're going to chat about some of the proposals that they have put on the table. And we're going to talk about some of the things that I have been talking about. It's a long time since Norton has been on Politics 101. And I think with your permission, I'm going to try to get him on here as soon as possible. Until then,